When Orrin Vance stopped to help Naira, an Apache woman stranded beside a broken wagon wheel, he had no notion that a simple act of decency would drag him into something far more dangerous than any gunfight. By the next morning, his cabin stood surrounded by war-painted riders, eyes fixed on every breath he took. Now it wasn't just his courage on the line. It was his patience, his judgment, and his will to stay alive as he fought to earn Naira's trust and face the consequences of a kindness he never thought twice about. Orrin woke to the thunder of hooves pounding hard against the earth. It wasn't a handful of riders. It was a storm. Horses circled his cabin like rolling thunder trapped between the hills. He eased toward the window, peering through a narrow crack, and what he saw froze him cold. Warriors. Dozens. No, more. Painted for battle, bows drawn tight, arrows aimed straight at his door. He couldn't make sense of it. He hadn't crossed anyone. No blood on his hands, no stolen land beneath his boots. Just hours ago, he'd fixed a broken wheel for a lone woman on the trail. Now enough arrows stood ready to tear his cabin apart, and he had no idea why. Orrin's cabin sat on the edge of dry country, where few folks ever passed through. Isolation had always been his shield. No neighbors, no trouble. That quiet life had held steady until the day before, when he came across Naira kneeling beside her wagon, working a shattered wheel under the brutal desert sun. Heat shimmered in waves, thick enough to bend the air, turning every breath into labor. Naira hadn't called out, didn't wave him down. She stayed locked on the task, focused on that broken wood like sheer will alone might mend it. Orrin should have kept riding. That's how men survived out here. Mind your business, keep moving. But something about her, silent, steady, unyielding, made him pull the reins. He dismounted without a word and stepped onto the cracked earth. When Naira finally looked up, her dark eyes measured him, sharp and unreadable beneath loose strands of black hair escaping her braid. She wore traditional Apache garments, turquoise stones catching the sunlight in flickers of blue fire. There was no fear in her face. No relief either, just a calm, calculating stare that made Orrin feel like he was the one being examined. He nodded towards the wheel, offering help. She didn't answer right away, just watched him, weighing every move. Then, after a long moment, she stepped back and gave him space. Orrin didn't ask her name. She didn't give it. The repair was straightforward. He pulled a solid piece of hardwood from his saddle gear, fitted it into the broken spoke, and bound it tight with leather straps. His hands worked with the ease of a man who'd fixed more things than he could count. Naira watched closely, not with gratitude, but with attention. The kind that memorizes. When he finished, Orrin stood and brushed the dust from his palms. Naira tested the wheel, spun it once, then gave a slight nod. No smile? No thanks. Just acknowledgement. Then she climbed onto her wagon and rode off without another word. The whole thing lasted minutes. Orrin went back to his cabin, unsaddled his horse, and slipped right back into his routine. Just another quiet day in a long string of them. He ate a cold meal, stretched out on his cot, and drifted off to the sound of wind brushing against the wooden walls. He never imagined it would change his life by sunrise. Before dawn broke, the sound of hooves dragged him awake again. Not one, not 10. An ocean. Horses moved in silence around his cabin, their presence pressing in from every side. Orrin grabbed his rifle and stepped toward the window, his heartbeat hammering hard in his chest. What he saw drained the warmth from his blood. An army of riders, faces painted red and black, bare chests exposed to the cold morning air. Some held bows already strung with arrows. Others carried spears, feathers shifting softly in the wind. There had to be over 300 of them, arranged in perfect rings stretching as far as the eye could see. At the front, unmoving atop a marked horse, sat Naira. Her turquoise jewelry caught the rising light. A decorated shawl now draped her shoulders, something she hadn't worn the day before. Beside her stood two towering figures, Eric and Kyle, their presence heavy with authority. Her gaze never left Oren's cabin. Calm, unblinking, waiting. Oren's mind raced. Had he offended her? Broken some sacred rule without knowing? Was fixing that wheel a mistake he didn't understand? His hands grew slick as he tightened his grip on the rifle. Then one warrior, Rusk Talon, lifted his spear slowly, deliberately. Every eye shifted toward Oren. The silence pressed down like weight. The spear struck the ground with a sharp, final crack, like a judge's gavel sealing a sentence. And in that moment, Oren Vance understood one thing with absolute clarity. There was no way out. He was trapped, boxed in by a tightening ring of warriors who had come for him. And at the heart of it all stood Naira, the very woman he had helped, watching him with a cold, unyielding focus. The sun climbed higher, burning away the last trace of morning chill, yet the warriors didn't move. They stood like desert monuments, faces painted, unreadable, weapons ready but not yet unleashed. Oren counted in his head. Close to 400. Even with a full rifle, he knew the truth. 100 bullets wouldn't save him. He'd be dead before he fired 20. Naira remained at the front, flanked by Eric and Kyle. Her decorated shawl shifted softly in the wind, turquoise stones at her throat catching the sunlight and scattering blue sparks across the dust. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her presence commanded order. Her silence laid down rules Oren didn't yet understand. Then one figure broke from the stillness. Rusk Talon dismounted. The man was massive, built like something carved out of stone, shoulders wide enough to carry war. 3 thick red lines cut across his face, marking him in a way that felt older than any law Oren knew. He walked forward with slow, deliberate steps, each one claiming the ground beneath him. Oren raised his rifle, hands slick with sweat. Rusk Talon stopped about 20 paces away. He drove his spear into the dirt with a firm, final motion, then spoke, his voice deep, measured, flowing in a language Oren couldn't understand. It carried weight, ceremony, like a judgment being passed, or a challenge issued. Oren strained to make sense of it, but there was nothing to hold on to. No shared words, no translator, only a ritual he had never learned. The isolation that once kept him safe now felt like a noose tightening around his neck. Naira lifted her hand. Barely a motion, palm outward. That was all it took. 10 warriors, the Flint Veil, slid off their horses in perfect unison, forming a half circle in front of the cabin. Their bows were drawn, arrows ready, but not aimed at him. They pointed them at the ground just outside the door. A wall. Flesh, bone, and absolute resolve. Oren's breathing quickened. The tension was rising fast. Whatever this was, it was escalating. His time was running out. But what did they want? Step outside? Speak? Fight? Surrender? Opening that door could mean instant death. Staying inside meant a slower kind of torture. Waiting, thirst, fear tightening with every passing second. His eyes found Naira again. She hadn't changed. The same calm expression from the day before. No anger, no impatience. Just that steady, unbroken focus. Like she could stand there for days if she had to. He still didn't know who she truly was. but he was starting to understand just how badly he had misjudged her. Yesterday, she had looked like a lone traveler. Today, she commanded an army. Everything about her, her stance, the turquoise, the way the warriors deferred without question, spoke of rank, of power, of something he had completely failed to recognize. Rusk Talon raised his hand. The flint veil shifted instantly, their bows lifting, now aimed straight at the door. The message was clear. Come out. Oren swallowed hard. There was only one choice left. Face whatever waited outside, or die hidden inside like a trapped animal. He took a breath and lowered the rifle. Each step toward the door made his hands tremble. The metal handle burned hot under his fingers, but there was no turning back now. With every breath, hundreds of eyes stayed locked on him. The sunlight hit him hard as he pulled the door open, stepping out into the open. Exposed, the brightness swallowed him as he faced a sea of warriors, any one of them ready to end him. Naira stood ahead, still watching, her calm almost more terrifying than anger. The flint veil didn't move. They stood like carved stone. Then Rusk Talon began walking toward him. Up close, the man was even more intimidating. Scars crossed his chest, old and deep. The red paint darkened his eyes until they looked like polished obsidian. He stopped just 3 steps away and spoke again, that same solemn rhythm echoing in the air. Oren searched his face for meaning, any hint of intent. Finding none, he slowly raised his hands, palms open, unarmed. His throat felt like dry sand. When he tried to speak, his voice came out rough, unsteady. I don't understand what you're saying. Oren Vance's voice came out dry, strained. Rusk Talon didn't react. Not a flicker. He repeated the same words, slower this time, each syllable deliberate, heavy with meaning Oren couldn't grasp. He was waiting for an answer Oren simply didn't have. Then Naira moved. She stepped down from her horse with quiet grace and walked forward. The warriors parted without hesitation, opening a path for her like it had always belonged to her. Oren watched closely now, noticing what he had missed before. The intricate stitching woven into her shawl, the silver bands circling her wrists, the way every single man present deferred to her without question. She stopped beside Rusk Talon and studied Oren. Those eyes gave nothing away. Then she spoke, in English, her tone steady, edged with authority. He asks if you knew who I was, when you helped me yesterday. Oren felt it immediately. This wasn't a conversation. It was a test, and the wrong answer could cost him everything. He swallowed hard, sweat trailing down his temple as Naira's gaze held him in place. There was no softness in her eyes, no simple curiosity. What he saw instead was command, the kind that decides the fate of many. And now, possibly his. Rusk Talon gave a slight nod, gesturing for Oren to explain himself. The air tightened. Silence pressed in so thick it felt like it swallowed sound itself. Oren forced the words out, stumbling at first, explaining about the broken wheel, how he'd found it, how he'd used leather straps to brace the split wood and get it turning again. Naira watched everything. Not just what he said, but how he said it. Her expression didn't shift, but something flickered behind her dark eyes, measuring, weighing, searching for truth beneath the surface. Oren couldn't read her, but he could feel it. Every move, every word being judged, and one mistake could end him. The silence stretched longer than it should have. Then Rusk Talon gave a slow nod. Around them, the warriors eased, just slightly. Bows lowered a fraction, though not a single man relaxed his guard. Oren felt a thin thread of relief. Not safety, just one more breath earned. Naira stepped forward. Her presence filled the space between Orin and Rusk Talon, calm and controlled, as if the tension itself bent around her. There was no urgency in her movement, no fear, only authority, the kind that didn't need to be spoken to be understood. Their eyes met. Orin searched for something. Mercy, recognition, even a hint of gratitude. There was none. Only that same quiet, relentless scrutiny. The woman he'd seen yesterday, alone on the trail, was gone. In her place stood someone far more dangerous, someone who led without raising her voice. Rusk Talon spoke again, his deep voice carrying through the trees. Naira translated without hesitation. He asks if you understand what your action meant, if you know that by helping me, you involved yourself with all of us. The weight of it hit Orin hard. He nodded slowly, shoulders tightening under the pressure. He knew better than to lie. I didn't know who you were, he said, voice rough but steady. I just helped because you needed it. Naira tilted her head slightly, listening. But she wasn't just hearing him. She was searching him, her gaze cut deeper than words, as if trying to pull the truth straight out of him. Around them, the Stonewind riders remained perfectly still, watching every movement. The horses shifted softly, sensing the tension hanging in the air. Wind stirred dust across the ground, dry leaves twisting along with it, like the land itself had joined the moment. Time seemed to slow. Orin felt suspended, caught somewhere between what had already happened and what might come next. Naira stepped closer. She measured her words before speaking again, her voice firm, clear, carrying across the silence. What you did was not small. Orin swallowed, the meaning settling deep in his chest. A simple act, but not in this world. Every action carries consequence. Now he understood. What he had done, without thought, had touched something larger than himself. A network of people, tradition, and unseen rules he was only beginning to grasp. Naira's expression softened, just slightly. But the authority in her presence never faded. She gestured toward Orin's cabin, then toward the open land beyond. A message without explanation. His home was no longer just his. It was being watched, protected, or controlled by the Stonewind people. The true meaning behind it all remained hidden. An unsolved riddle Orin Vance had no choice but to figure out. One of the riders stepped forward with steady, deliberate strides. Jareth Klein, carrying a worn leather bundle. He stopped at the threshold and set it down without a word. Orin opened it carefully. Inside, dried meat, water, supplies enough to keep a man alive. It wasn't mercy. It was a message. He could die here, or he could live. Naira stayed close, her gaze never leaving him. Every movement he made, every shift of his hands was weighed and measured. This wasn't an offer of comfort. It was a test. One misstep, and the outcome could turn deadly. Orin understood it then. Trust wasn't given. It was earned. Slowly, carefully. Word by word, action by action. Around him, the Stonewind riders shifted slightly, forming a loose half-circle. Not closing in, but not giving ground either. They held their positions, alert, watching for any sign of deception, any move that might be taken as a threat. Orin lifted the water and took a small drink. The relief was immediate, cooling his throat, but it didn't ease the tension. Naira's eyes never wavered. Every swallow, every breath, judged, as if she were searching for something beneath the surface, testing whether his actions came from truth or from fear. The sun climbed higher, casting the cabin in a wash of gold. The world looked still, quiet, but beneath it lay a pressure thick as a storm waiting to break. Decisions hadn't been made yet, not final ones. Oren knew this wasn't over. It was just beginning. And whatever came next would be remembered. Naira stepped back slightly, giving a subtle gesture. Sit. Speak. Oren obeyed without hesitation, lowering himself carefully, every movement controlled, measured so he wouldn't offend. Naira remained standing, watching, her presence unwavering. This wasn't a casual meeting. It was something older, something unspoken, a ritual. Beside her, Rusk Talon inclined his head slightly, a gesture of respect, of acknowledgement. Oren caught it immediately. She was the authority here, not questioned, not challenged. Naira gave a faint nod in return, signaling that the exchange could continue, but only within the boundaries she set. Oren understood. Every word mattered now, every gesture. Naira finally spoke. "My people have been watching," she said, her voice calm but firm. "What you did was not something small." Oren listened closely, every sense sharpened. He knew his life might depend on how well he understood what she was telling him. Not just the words, but what lay beneath them. The code. The expectations. The weight of responsibility carried by the Stonewind people. Rusk Talon remained at her side, silent but vigilant. The others spread out further, giving space, but never losing focus. Always watching. Oren noticed the horses had calmed. The wind moved softly across the ground, stirring dust in slow spirals, like the land itself was holding its breath. Naira continued. "What you did can be seen in many ways. You must show your intention clearly." The warning landed heavy. This wasn't just a favor. It was a doorway, one that led into the trust of an entire people, or their rejection. And that trust was fragile. Oren nodded slowly. Now he understood. Helping her hadn't been a small moment. It had tied him to something far greater than himself. Something built on old rules, unseen hierarchies, and discipline he was only beginning to grasp. Naira fell silent for a few seconds, watching, judging, deciding whether his words and his actions were enough. Nearby, a few of the riders eased their stance, just slightly. Not relaxed, but no longer on the edge of attack. Oren could feel it. Every movement he made mattered, even the smallest gesture. Naira stood at the center of it all, balancing threat and protection with nothing more than her presence. The wind lifted the edge of her shawl, and a chill ran down Oren's spine. The woman who had needed help just yesterday now stood as the one shaping Oren Vance's fate. When their eyes met again, he saw it clearly. Judgment and something else. Possibility. Not mercy, not yet, but something that might become it. Rusk Talon motioned toward the bundle of supplies, then toward the cabin. The meaning was unmistakable. Stay inside. Wait. Be judged. It was both a warning and a form of protection. A line drawn in the dust. The watch would continue. Trust would not come freely. Naira stepped back, her hand sweeping slightly through the air, signaling that the exchange wasn't over, only controlled. Everything now unfolded under her gaze. The tension didn't break. It shifted, settling into something tighter, balanced between fear and respect. Oren leaned back slowly, his muscles stiff from holding himself too tightly for too long. Every glance, every movement from Naira carried weight, authority shaped by something older than law. He understood now. He had stepped into a world where even the smallest action could echo far beyond its moment, and if he didn't learn fast, it would cost him everything. Morning came again, cold and pale light slipping through the cracks of the cabin walls. Oren stayed alert, watching shadows move beyond the window, tracking every flicker of motion in the trees. He knew they were still out there, the Stonewind riders, watching, listening, measuring every breath he took. The silence pressed in heavy. The only sound inside was the faint creak of wood beneath his boots as he moved carefully across the floor. Even that felt too loud, too exposed. Out here, every sound meant something. Every movement spoke, and he knew better than to send the wrong message. Then Naira appeared in the doorway. She stood there wrapped in a blanket that seemed to drink in the light around her. The space inside the cabin shifted the moment she stepped in, filled with presence, with control. Oren didn't move. He didn't need to. Her eyes held him in place. She hadn't spoken yet, but she didn't have to. There was something in the way she watched, a depth that felt like it reached beyond what he showed on the surface, like she could see intention itself, hidden beneath action. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was steady, clear. She laid out expectations, routine, boundaries, not orders shouted in command, but rules spoken as if they had always existed. Oren listened closely, taking in every word, every tone. He understood now. These weren't just instructions. They were warnings wrapped in teaching, a code, one that governed everything. The world he had stepped into wasn't simple. It was old, structured, unforgiving. Outside, through the window, the silhouettes of the Stonewind riders remained in place, still as stone, weapons visible but not raised, ready, but restrained. Oren began to notice the pattern. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was communication. And Naira stood at the center of it. A young man approached quietly, Soren, carrying a container of fresh water. He set it down in front of Oren without a word. Simple, but not meaningless. It was a signal, not full acceptance, but the first step toward it. A recognition that Oren's intentions might have been honest, even if the watch had not ended. Naira turned her gaze toward the horizon, gesturing outward. Movement. Soon. The warriors responded instantly, beginning to organize with quiet efficiency. No shouting, no confusion, just motion guided by understanding. Oren saw it clearly now. What he had done yesterday had tied his life to theirs, not temporarily, permanently. The wind rolled through the clearing, bending the grass and lifting dust into the air around the cabin. And Oren Vance understood one thing more than ever. Every step he took from here on mattered. Every sound felt sharper now. Too sharp. Shadows stretched long across the ground, and Oren Vance could feel the tension hanging in the air like a drawn wire. It was a constant reminder. He wasn't alone. The choice he'd made to help Naira had placed him inside a world ruled by strict, unseen laws. Naira stepped closer and began inspecting the contents of the cabin. Her gaze moved with precision, taking in every item, every detail. Nothing escaped her notice. Oren understood immediately. There would be no guessing here, no careless action. The way he treated his space, his belongings, it all mattered. It would shape how she judged him. The sun climbed slowly, casting light across the faces of the Stonewind riders, who remained on watch outside. Every move Oren made was seen, measured, weighed. He realized he was learning a silent language, one where actions spoke louder than any words ever could, where respect wasn't courtesy, it was survival. Naira lowered herself across from him and gave a slight motion. Speak. The opportunity to address her directly wasn't just permission, it was a test. Oren had to choose his words carefully. Honest, respectful, but never weak, never reckless. He explained how he'd come across the broken wheel, walked her through each step, the wood, the straps, the way he secured it so it would hold. He spoke plainly, without embellishment. Naira listened, not just to the story, but to what lay beneath it. Her eyes searched deeper, beyond the words themselves, weighing intention against action. Around them, the Stonewind riders held their positions, forming a quiet perimeter. The tension didn't fade, but it shifted. Less like a threat now, more like scrutiny. Oren could feel it, the difference. He wasn't in immediate danger anymore, but he wasn't safe either. This was something else, an unspoken agreement, observation. Naira finally gave a small nod. That was all. No smile, no warmth, but it meant something. Oren understood. Approval didn't mean acceptance. It wasn't friendship. It was something cautious, controlled, a recognition that he had a place, for now, within the edge of their world. Soren approached again, bringing more supplies. He set them down quietly. Oren responded with a subtle nod, careful not to overdo it. Even gratitude had to be measured here. Everything did. Every action had to reflect understanding, respect for the balance that now defined his life, and Naira's judgment over it. She rose and moved toward the cabin door. Then she paused and gestured. Stay. The meaning was unmistakable. He was to remain there while they moved beyond his reach. Trust existed, but only as long as he respected its boundaries. Oren nodded and stayed where he was, watching as Naira stepped away. The vulnerability lingered, sharp and undeniable, but beneath it, something else had taken root. Understanding. This world wasn't chaos, it was order, harsh, but deliberate. Outside, the Stonewind riders held their positions. Alert, still, ready, but not aggressive. Oren saw it now. This wasn't fear-driven control. It was discipline. Naira turned slightly before disappearing into the trees, her eyes meeting his one last time. She didn't speak, but she didn't need to. The message was clear. Trust had to be earned, and it could vanish with a single mistake. Oren drew a slow breath, letting the lesson settle deep. What he'd done the day before had created something fragile, something that could break just as easily as it could grow. From this moment on, every move he made would be seen, judged, not just by Naira, but by the entire Stonewind people, whose strength rested on discipline and loyalty without question. The sunlight grew harsher, sharpening every line of the perimeter the Stonewind riders held. Oren Vance felt the weight of their watch pressing down on him, but beneath it, something unexpected stirred. A sense of safety. Strange, but real. As if Naira and her people weren't just guarding against him. They were guarding him too, holding him in that narrow space between danger and trust. Naira finally turned toward the tree line and gave a subtle signal. Move. At once, the riders responded. No hesitation, no confusion. The Stonewind riders shifted as one, flowing into motion with perfect coordination. Oren watched it unfold, realizing something deeper. One man's action could shape how an entire people saw him. And trust. Trust wasn't a thing you claimed. It was something you moved through, like a careful dance between what you did and what you meant. The horses snorted softly, restless but controlled. Even the land seemed to lean into the moment, the rustling leaves, the shifting shadows, all part of something larger than him. Out here, everything mattered. Every movement, every breath. Skill alone wasn't enough. You had to understand the order, the hierarchy, the respect that held it all together. Rusk Talon stepped closer, giving a small, deliberate gesture. "Stay sharp." It wasn't spoken, but Orin understood. Naira's authority didn't end with her voice. It lived in every motion around him, every command, every position taken by her riders. Orin realized then. Survival wasn't just about learning the rules. It was about understanding why they existed. Naira disappeared into the trees, vanishing as if the land itself had swallowed her. She left him behind, under the watchful eyes of her people. Orin breathed slowly, carefully. The tension eased, just a fraction. But it never disappeared. He knew now, what happened yesterday, what was happening today, it had already changed him, changed the way he saw the world. And he had only begun to understand it. He remained inside the cabin, watching as the Stonewind riders spread out along the perimeter. They didn't lose formation, didn't lose awareness. Every movement precise, every step controlled. It wasn't chaos, it was discipline, something close to a silent ballet of survival. The breeze stirred through the trees, leaves whispering softly. The creak of wood beneath Orin's boots mixed with the low sounds of horses shifting outside. It all blended together into something almost alive. Like the land itself was watching him, judging him. Naira appeared again at the edge of the clearing. Still, unshaken, her eyes locked onto him, studying every detail, every gesture, every breath. She didn't need to raise her voice. She never did. Authority followed her without question. And Orin understood. Trust wasn't something you asked for here. It was something you proved. He stepped forward carefully, adjusting his hat against the rising sun. That feeling of being watched never left him. It sharpened everything, his movements, his thoughts. One wrong move, and everything could fall apart. Naira gave a small signal toward the supplies inside the cabin. "Organize them." Orin nodded, understanding immediately. This wasn't just work. It was another test, a measure of how well he respected the order she had set. The riders remained at the perimeter, silent and still, like living shadows, watching, always watching. As Orin began moving the crates, adjusting the supplies, he could feel it, their eyes on him, measuring, weighing, and for the first time, he understood something clearly. This watch over him wasn't just about control, it was about balance, safety built on discipline, trust built on action. Naira stood nearby, saying nothing, but her silence carried more weight than any command. Every detail was under scrutiny. Every small mistake had the power to shift how they saw him. Even the slightest misstep. The wind stirred dust and dry leaves into the air, wrapping the clearing in a tension that felt thick, almost visible. Orin Vance drew a slow breath, knowing the hours ahead inside that cabin weren't just about waiting. They were a test of judgment, awareness, and his ability to understand a way of life that wasn't his. Then Naira spoke. Her voice was calm, steady, but carried weight. She explained the importance of everything within the camp. Every tool, every supply, every action. Nothing was without purpose. Nothing was without meaning. Orin listened closely. He understood now. Her words weren't just instruction. They were layered. Beneath them lived rules that weren't spoken outright, lessons shaped by generations, guiding how one moved, acted, and survived within the Stonewind people. The sun climbed higher, casting light across the faces of the Stonewind riders, who remained watchful, unmoving. Oren felt the pressure of their eyes. But alongside it, that same strange feeling lingered. Not just judgment, something close to acceptance. Conditional. Fragile. Nira moved towards the doorway and gave a subtle motion. Go, check the perimeter. Oren understood immediately. This wasn't freedom. It was a test. Every step outside that cabin had to be measured, controlled, respectful, always aware of the eyes still fixed on him. As he stepped out, he noticed how Naira held silent contact with the riders. No words passed, but understanding did. Her authority stretched beyond speech, proving that here, silence could command just as strongly as any spoken order. Out in the open, every tree, every shifting shadow seemed alive, watching. Oren walked carefully along the perimeter, aware of the distance the riders kept. Close enough to act, far enough to observe. They weren't closing in, but they weren't letting go either. It was a balance, one that depended on him. Naira approached a horse and gave a slight gesture. Check it, prepare it. Oren nodded and stepped forward, examining the animal with care. He checked the saddle, the straps, the hooves, every detail handled with quiet precision. He followed her instruction without hesitation, because now he understood. Every task had meaning. Every correct action strengthened his place here, however fragile that place still was. Every movement he made was watched, measured, judged. The lesson was clear. It wasn't just about skill. It was about listening, learning, acting with the right intent. Around him, the Stonewind riders shifted slightly, maintaining their wide perimeter, never loose, never careless. The tension remained, constant as breath. But within it, there was structure, and within that structure, discipline. Naira turned toward him again, her gaze sharp. Stay. Wait here. Her instruction carried no room for misinterpretation. The test wasn't over. Not even close. Oren gave a small nod and held his position. He understood now. Waiting wasn't idle. It was part of the trial. Every second of stillness, every controlled movement, showed whether he understood the weight of her authority and the order that governed her people. The wind rolled through the grass, tugging at blankets and dust. The riders remained alert, their eyes tracking every detail. Oren could feel it, the lesson in the air. This world ran on clear laws. Action and intention were one and the same. Naira stepped closer again and gave a final signal. Move. Prepare the food. Oren caught the shift immediately. Her approval was there, but measured. Nothing was given freely. Every step forward had to reflect awareness, restraint, respect. Because here, one careless move could undo everything. The cowboy got to work, arranging the utensils while following Naira's silent cues, watching closely for even the smallest reaction from her. Out here, he was learning fast. Doing the right thing wasn't enough. It had to be done the right way. Understanding the rules mattered more than speed, more than strength. Around the cabin, the Stonewind riders held their positions, keeping a steady perimeter without closing in. Oren Vance felt it, the tension easing just a little. Not gone, but shifting, like his careful actions had earned him the smallest measure of trust. Still, he knew better. The real test hadn't even begun. Naira turned her head toward the trees, scanning the horizon, reading signals only her people understood. Every movement she made carried meaning, part of a silent language Oren was only beginning to grasp. It was that language that shaped everything now. Trust, respect, Survival? Oren finished setting the utensils and glanced toward her, waiting. She gave the slightest nod. Approval. Temporary. Earned. Not given. Oren understood. Every correct action moved him forward. But nothing lasted. Trust had to be proven again and again in a world built on discipline and watchfulness. The sunlight grew stronger, washing over the clearing as activity continued with quiet precision. Oren took a slow breath, realizing every minute here was a lesson. Patience, respect, awareness. What he had with Naira, with the Stonewind people, was fragile. A balance between what he did and what they believed about why he did it. The wind drifted through the clearing as he continued working, stacking wood, adjusting supplies, never forgetting that every motion was being watched. Naira stayed close, silent, her eyes measuring him constantly, judging intent without needing a single word. Around them, the riders moved with controlled precision, adjusting their positions in a pattern that spoke of strength and order. Nothing was random. Nothing was wasted. Oren saw it clearly now. Discipline was the true measure of respect in this world. Not words, not promises, action. Naira stepped closer and pointed toward the horizon. Watch. Learn. He followed her gaze, understanding immediately. He had to read the land, the signs, the subtle shifts that could mean danger. His awareness, his instincts, would decide whether he earned their trust. As he moved, tightening straps, checking the horses, he could feel their eyes on him like weight pressing down. Every second carried meaning. Trust wasn't given. It was built, slow, careful, precise. Naira walked toward a nearby tree, her eyes sweeping the surroundings with sharp, practiced focus. Oren noticed how quickly she took everything in. Every shadow, every sound. Survival here depended on seeing what others missed. He breathed deeply, steadying himself. Every action had to be measured. He handled the tools with care, adjusted ropes, checked the animals, aware that even the smallest mistake could shift how they saw him. That balance, thin, fragile, could break in an instant. Finally, Naira spoke again. She explained the importance of certain rituals before moving out to patrol. Oren listened closely, realizing this wasn't just tradition. It was law, a code of respect that defined how outsiders were judged, and whether they were accepted at all. The Stonewind riders remained silent, but their presence filled the space like pressure before a storm. Oren could feel it, the shared awareness, the unity, protection and judgment, both at once. Naira turned back to him and gave another instruction. Check the weapons. Check everything. Every tool had to be ready. Perfect. Because care, attention to detail, was more than survival. It was respect. And in this world, respect meant everything. Oren Vance understood that part right away. He moved carefully, inspecting every rifle, every blade, following Naira's silent guidance. No words were needed. He was learning fast, the value of each tool, each detail. Out here, skill alone meant nothing if you didn't understand the rules behind it, and every action carried more weight than anything a man could say. Naira circled the cabin slowly, studying the perimeter. Oren watched her, noticing how every step had purpose. Every glance she gave seemed to carry meaning, silent communication flowing between her and the Stonewind riders. That's when it became clear. Strategy here wasn't loud. It was woven quietly through patience and awareness. The sun dipped lower, stretching long shadows across the ground. Oren tracked them instinctively, watching how the light shifted across the land. The riders' movements felt both predictable and impossible to read at the same time. That was the difference. Discipline. not rigidity. Naira stopped in front of him and pointed toward a stretch of ground beyond the cabin. "Patrol it. Make sure it's clear." Oren nodded and moved. Every step he took was judged in silence. Every decision shaped how they saw him, whether he could be trusted or not. Around him, the stone-wind riders adjusted their positions, tightening the perimeter with quiet precision. The tension was still there, but so was something else. Structure. Order. He was beginning to understand that their strength didn't come from force alone, but from knowing their roles and honoring them without question. Naira stepped closer again, watching as Oren worked, stacking wood, arranging tools. Every movement he made was deliberate now, careful, controlled, a reflection of everything he was learning. She didn't speak, but he felt it, her approval. Subtle, but real. He moved to the horses next, checking reins, adjusting saddles, running his hands along their gear. Every detail mattered. A loose strap, a missed flaw, any of it could mean failure when it counted. And failure didn't just affect him, it affected them all. That was respect. That was responsibility. Naira stepped away briefly, exchanging silent signals with the riders. Oren watched closely, seeing how they responded. Not with words, but with movement. A glance, a shift in posture. Orders passed without sound, as clear as any command shouted across a battlefield. The wind picked up, stirring dust and leaves into the air. The atmosphere thickened again, focused, controlled. Oren took a slow breath, grounding himself. Every second mattered. Patience, attention, observation. That's how trust was built. Naira returned and gave another signal. "Prepare the meal." Oren understood immediately. Even something as simple as food wasn't simple here. It was part of the test, another chance to show discipline, respect, willingness to learn. He began organizing the supplies, moving with care, following her unspoken expectations. Each correct action added to something, slowly shaping how they saw him. Not as an outsider, but not yet as one of them either. The stone-wind riders remained in position, forming a living boundary, part shield, part warning. Oren knew where he stood. Accepted. For now. But never guaranteed. Trust wasn't permanent. It had to be earned again, every minute. Naira turned back toward him, her eyes sharp. "Stay alert. Watch everything." He nodded. Every instruction she gave reinforced the same truth. Discipline wasn't optional. Neither was awareness. This wasn't just about learning tasks. It was about learning how to exist in their world. Oren adjusted the utensils, checked every last detail, refining his movements with precision. Patience was no longer a burden. It was a strength and observation. A weapon. He understood now that earning Naira's acceptance, and that of the Stonewind Riders, depended just as much on how he learned as on what he did. Naira returned once more, watching as he finished the final tasks of the day. She didn't speak, but her silence said enough. He had done well, for now, but the real test had only just begun, and every day ahead would demand more attention, more control. No mistakes. The evening light settled over the cabin and the surrounding perimeter, casting everything in a warm, golden glow. The Stonewind riders held their positions with quiet precision. Oren Vance drew a slow breath, fully aware now. Every passing minute was a choice, and whether he belonged here or not would depend on patience, respect, and constant awareness. Dawn came again, silent and heavy, filling the cabin with a stillness that carried weight. Oren rose, the tension from the day before still lingering in his body. Outside, Naira was already awake, standing at the edge of the clearing, watching the land as if she could measure every shadow, every sound. Oren checked the gear and the horses, tightening straps, adjusting every detail. This wasn't just routine anymore. It was a statement. Respect, willingness, control. Every movement was observed, judged. Precision had become his strongest asset. Naira approached and pointed toward a stretch of land north of the clearing. "Come." Oren understood. He moved without hesitation, falling in beside her. Each step became a lesson, silent, deliberate, teaching him how to see, how to listen, how to exist within the unspoken code that guided the Stonewind people. Behind them, the riders maintained their formation, a perimeter that blended watchfulness with strategy. Oren began to notice it clearly now. Their movements weren't random. They were synchronized, disciplined. Security here didn't come from strength alone. It came from knowing your role and never breaking it. Naira walked ahead with steady purpose, occasionally gesturing toward the ground, marking areas of risk. Oren followed closely, studying everything. The land wasn't empty. It was alive with meaning. A rock, a bush, a shadow. Each could hide danger or offer advantage. He adjusted his horse's bridle as he moved, understanding something deeper. Respect was earned through attention, through obedience, through awareness. Every correct action placed him one step closer to acceptance. Naira stopped suddenly and fixed her gaze on the horizon. Oren noticed the change immediately. Her eyes sharpened, calculating, reading threats that weren't visible to him yet. He understood then. Perception and patience were just as deadly as any weapon. Behind them, the Stonewind riders shifted positions in silence, covering angles, securing space. No words were exchanged, but everything was communicated. A glance, a movement, a shared understanding. This was how they spoke. Naira pointed to the ground ahead. A trap. Oren hadn't seen it, not until she showed him. He knelt carefully, following her guidance, disabling it with slow, controlled movements. He could feel it, the weight of their eyes on him. Every action judged, every mistake remembered. He finished and stood. Another lesson learned. Strength alone meant nothing out here. Knowledge and respect for the rules. That was survival. Naira led him deeper along narrow, covered trails, showing him how to read the land. The direction of the wind, the subtle shifts in terrain, the signs most men would overlook. Each step became a test. Each success, a quiet confirmation. The sun climbed higher, stretching long shadows across the ground. Oren used them, watching how light and shape revealed hidden details. He was beginning to understand. The land itself was a weapon, if you knew how to read it. Naira stopped at the edge of a creek and pointed toward a narrow path. "Follow. No explanation, no hesitation." Oren obeyed. He understood now. Her decisions came from experience, from survival. Questioning them wasn't just unnecessary, it was dangerous. Around them, the Stonewind riders moved silently along the flanks, securing their position. Oren could feel it again, the tension beneath their calm. Always present, always ready. Every glance from them carried meaning, not just watching for threats, but judging him, measuring whether he respected the rules. Naira raised her hand, signaling a brief halt. Rest. But even that wasn't idle. Oren understood. Every pause had purpose. To observe, to reassess, to reinforce discipline. Nothing here was accidental. Everything was part of the lesson, Nothing out here was sloochy or left to chance. Everything moved with deliberate, calculated precision. Orin Vance settled beside the horses, watching how Naira held steady eye contact with her riders. He began to understand something deeper. Leadership here wasn't loud. It was quiet, controlled, unbreakable. Every gesture she made carried authority. Every movement reinforced the unity of the Stonewind riders, especially when danger lingered close. Naira turned toward him and gave a simple signal. "Prepare the water. Prepare the food." Orin moved immediately. Each task wasn't just work. It was a measure, a way to show whether he understood his place, whether he could follow the rhythm of their world. He arranged the utensils, checked the horses again, feeling the steady weight of watchful eyes on him. Always watching, always judging. He realized then, the daily routine wasn't routine at all. It was training, evaluation. Every movement built or broke his standing. Naira moved along the perimeter, scanning the land, then pointed out potential escape paths. Orin followed her gaze, understanding instantly. This wasn't just about survival in the moment. It was about thinking ahead, planning, adapting. Each signal she gave was a lesson, teaching him to read situations before they unfolded, to stay one step ahead. Around them, the riders shifted in perfect coordination, balancing visibility with discretion. Orin studied it carefully. This was their strength. Not chaos, not noise, but control. Communication without words. Every movement carried meaning. Every action reinforced discipline. Naira returned and gestured again. "Check the horses." Orin didn't hesitate. He went back over every strap, every buckle, every detail. He understood now. Excellence in small things mattered. It proved consistency. And consistency built trust. The wind drifted through the clearing, carrying the scent of the forest. Orin drew a deep breath, letting it settle him. Every second spent watching, learning, holding steady, was shaping him. Out here, survival wasn't just about reacting. It was about knowing, understanding, acting with precision. Naira turned once more and signaled. "We move back." Slow. Orin nodded. Every step they took was deliberate, controlled, a chance to prove he could move within their structure without breaking it. Observation, patience, discipline. That was how harmony was maintained. As the light of evening deepened, painting the land in warm gold, Orin began to see how even shadows changed the terrain, how Naira used those shifting details, light, movement, silence, to teach without speaking. Every moment, another lesson. He finished the last of his tasks, aware that nothing he did went unnoticed. Every correct action strengthened his place, even if only slightly. Naira watched him closely, evaluating, measuring. Then, just a faint shift, approval, not spoken. But there. Orin understood now. Real acceptance didn't come from one moment. It came from consistency, from patience, from respecting the rhythm of the Stonewind people without forcing his way into it. Night passed, and morning came again. Quiet, heavy. The first light crept across the trees surrounding the cabin, but the stillness carried tension beneath it. The calm felt deceptive. Because Orin knew. Even in silence, he was still being watched. Orin Vance stood at the doorway, adjusting his hat, breathing slow and controlled. Every creak of wood beneath his boots, every whisper of wind through the trees felt louder than it should. Amplified. Dangerous. He understood now. Patience wasn't optional. One wrong move, one careless breath, and the tension hanging in the air could snap without warning. Then Naira emerged from the trees. Her steps were light, measured, controlled. Her eyes swept the clearing, reading everything: the land, the riders, the space between them. Oren followed her with his gaze, fully aware that every decision she made carried immediate consequence. Around them, the Stonewind riders remained still, forming a silent circle, watching with unwavering intensity. Oren began to see it clearly, the precision in their positioning. Nothing random, nothing wasted. Every movement spoke, without a word. And he understood, facing them without respect, without strategy, would be fatal. The tension thickened with every passing second. Naira gave a subtle motion. "Come. Stay calm." Oren stepped forward slowly. He could feel it, the weight of their eyes pressing against him from all sides. Every step he took was deliberate, every breath measured. He was learning how to move without disturbing the balance, how to exist in a space where violence could ignite without warning. Then Rusk Talon stepped forward slightly, not too close, just enough. Watching, evaluating. Every movement he made carried intent. Oren understood then. Respect wasn't earned through words, not here. It came through action, through stillness, through control. Naira spoke softly to the riders, her voice low, almost lost to the wind. Oren couldn't catch the words, but he didn't need to. He understood her role. She was the bridge, the force holding everything together. His place here depended on recognizing that and never challenging it. The riders tightened their formation, creating a perfect perimeter around the cabin. Horses stood still, eyes locked forward, unmoving, unforgiving. Oren watched carefully, learning to read what wasn't spoken. Every shift of a shoulder, every flicker of movement. Messages passed silently between them. This was how they communicated. Precise, efficient, unmistakable. Naira stepped closer to him and gave a quiet signal. "Stay still." No sudden movement. Oren obeyed instantly. He understood now. His life depended on it. Not strength, not speed. Patience, respect, absolute control. Rusk Talon lowered his hand slightly. A signal. They would hold position. For now. Oren recognized it for what it was. A test. Every gesture carried meaning. Every second demanded discipline. This tension wouldn't break through force, only through calm, through observation, through restraint. Naira gave another instruction with a slight motion. "Prepare the horses. Keep them close. No fear." Oren moved carefully, following her lead. Every motion, measured, controlled. He could feel it again, their eyes tracking him, weighing him. Even the smallest action mattered. The air grew heavier with the waiting. Every shadow seemed alive. Every movement noticed. The lesson was clear. Survival here depended on vigilance, on patience, on cooperation. Naira moved among the riders, her gestures subtle, her voice low, commands flowing like wind through grass. Oren watched, understanding his role more clearly than ever. Learn. Adapt. Prove yourself. Because everything he did shaped how they saw him. The tension spiked suddenly when one of the horses let out a sharp snort. Oren froze, didn't move, didn't react. He slowed his breathing, watching carefully, reading their response. He knew it now. One careless move could spark violence, but control built trust. Naira returned to his side, standing close, and just like that, the tension eased, not gone, but steadied, held in place. By her presence alone. The riders held their watch, but something had shifted, their stance no longer as rigid, their tension no longer on the edge of breaking. Orrin Vance felt it clearly now. Naira's calm wasn't weakness. It was a shield, a steady force that held everything together, keeping the moment from collapsing into violence. Then Rusk Talon stepped forward. Slow. Measured. His eyes locked onto Orrin, studying him with every step. There was no rush in him, only calculation. Orrin understood what was happening. This wasn't intimidation, it was evaluation, and the answer depended on him. Orrin kept still, calm, controlled, because now he knew his behavior, his restraint, his respect, that was what kept the peace alive. Naira gave a subtle signal. Move the horses. Carefully. It was trust, not complete, but real. Orrin accepted it the only way he could, through action. He adjusted the reins, shifted the animals slightly, keeping everything steady, deliberate. No sudden movements, no wasted effort. Every gesture had to match the trust given. Around him, the Stonewind riders held formation, their eyes tracking every motion. Discipline, precision. Nothing escaped them, and Orrin learned something else. Out here, patience would always outrun impulse. Observation would always defeat haste. Naira moved back toward the center, her gaze shifting between Rusk Talon and Orrin. Her movements spoke clearly enough. He could be trusted. But only so far. The watch would continue. Orrin understood. Respect wasn't earned in a moment. It was built, slowly, through consistency, through discipline. The sun dipped lower, stretching shadows long across the ground. The land itself began to change. Light, bending shapes, turning familiar ground into something uncertain. Orrin adjusted his stance, studying every detail. Light, shadow, movement. All of it mattered. Naira gave another signal. Return to the cabin. Slow. Controlled. Orrin followed, each step careful, aware that even now, every movement was part of the lesson. Respect, coordination, restraint. This wasn't just walking back, it was proving he understood. The riders shifted outward slightly, maintaining their perimeter as Orrin moved. They didn't close in, but they didn't lose control either. Every calm movement he made strengthened something. Trust, even if only by inches. Naira walked beside him until they reached the door. Then she gestured. Stay inside. Watch. Orrin nodded. He understood now. This wasn't confinement. It was responsibility, patience, respect, discipline. That's what kept a man alive here. Behind them, Rusk Talon finally turned away, signaling the riders. Slowly they withdrew, not disappearing, but pulling back into a distant perimeter. Still watching. Always watching. Orrin exhaled deeply. Now he knew the truth. Survival here wasn't about strength. It was about control, about understanding the rules, and never breaking them. Naira remained near the cabin for a moment, watching the riders settle into position. Then her eyes returned to Orrin. A quiet shift, approval, not spoken, but clear. The tension eased, not gone, but no longer crushing. And Orrin realized something he hadn't expected. He had learned something real, something that would stay with him. Trust, discipline, respect. The sun sank behind the hills, painting the cabin in deep, warm tones. Orrin settled near the doorway, feeling the faint edge of safety that Naira's presence and the order of the Stonewind riders provided. It wasn't peace. Not yet. But it was enough. And the lesson of that day would never leave him.